listening to the Straight to Video podcast with Rob Lane.
Hey, what is going on? This is Rob Lane and you're listening to the Straight to Video podcast. If you're new, then welcome on board, but if you're a regular listener, thank you so much for the continued support. So on today's show, I get to speak to one of the coolest cats out there, guitarist Billy Rowe, who was around right from the beginning of the Hollywood hard rock explosion of the mid to late 80s with a band that is credited as being one of the original big-time draws on the Sunset Strip. After Motley Crue and Rat had blown the doors wide open for this new glam rock and roll scene, then along would come the likes of Guns N' Roses, Poison, Faster Pussycat, but also a band called Jetboy, with their low-slung guitars, streetwise image, and a sound which should have made them a surefire chart success. Now, unfortunately, whilst everything was in their grasp, record company shuffles and delays in releases would mean that the band never got the chance for their worldwide stardom they deserved, but even today the name Jetboy and the music they put out is still credited as being one of the original pioneers of such a great, fun rock scene. Billy is a lifer though when it comes to rock and roll. After Jetboy, he would begin a 10-year push with his band American Heartbreak, who channeled a great power pop, heavy guitar-driven sound during the late 90s and early 2000s, which I was eager to learn more about. And since then, Jetboy has been performing again, as well as Billy setting up his company Rock and Roll Relics, which specializes in high-end guitars with a great vintage look and feel. And these are played by the likes of Billy Joe Armstrong from Green Day, Peter Buck from R.E.M., Bruce Kulick of Kiss, and Adam Slack of the Struts, to name but a few. Most recently though, Billy has joined the ranks of the band Buckcherry and is currently on tour right through to the end of the year and beyond. Like I say, Billy is in it for the long haul. Before we listen to my chat with Billy, please consider giving our friends Dead Skull Coffee a visit and check out their awesome independent rock and roll coffee company. As a thank you for the support they're giving listeners to this show, 15% off their coffee by simply adding the promo code STV on checkout, which you can do over at deadskullcoffee.co.uk. Also, we have our very own Straight to Video Patreon page, which gives you inside access to this show with a bonus podcast, early heads up on guests, along with the chance to grab some exclusive merch not available anywhere else. Support tiers start at just £2 a month, and you can find out all the information over at patreon.com/STVpod. Alright, it was really great to catch up with Billy Rowe of Jetboy, Buckcherry and Rock and Roll Relics. We talk a lot about growing up in San Francisco and his early gigs and introductions to rock and roll before heading to Hollywood and also putting together the great band American Heartbreak. For more info, there's lots to check out at jetboyrocks.com, buckcherry.com, and if you want to learn more about Billy's great guitars, then please visit rockandrollrelics.net. Okay, let's do this and let's dive straight into my straight to video talk with Billy Rowe. Gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah.
How you doing, mate?
Good. Get your little fancy setup. I like it.
This ain't very rock and roll. 8 a.m. in the morning.
No. Well, we could look at it as old school rock and roll as we're just rolling into bed.
Let's go that route.
But not anymore. We're old school rock and roll where we're older and we get up early.
Yes. How you doing? Everything going all right?
Yeah, it's good.
When did you get in? Have you been doing some shows these past few days? Is that what it was?
Yeah, pretty much. It's like with this, their schedule is 2 to 3 weeks and then home for 4 days and then 2 to 3 weeks. And that started in May.
Right.
So right now it goes all the way through to December. So I leave tomorrow again.
Unreal, man. How is it getting back into that tour mode, like full on tour mode?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I haven't done the tour mode that they do in like 30 years or something. So it's good. You know, they got a well-oiled machine. I like it.
You've hit the ground running, and like you say, you're pretty booked out to the rest of the year. Have you all known each other for some time? Have you crossed paths, or was their kind of run? It was like obviously a few years after Jetboy.
Well, I've known. I met Stevie like when he joined the band when the 15 record, we met around then. And I knew their former bass player, Jimmy Ashurst, for a very, very long time. So with him, I go way back. And then Stevie, we kept in touch through all that time. We know guitar geeks and he loves what I do with guitars. And bass player now, Kelly, I've known for 30 something years, back when he was in his Electric Love Hogs and Goldfinger and all that. So
lots of good reminiscing then. Lots of good stories to share.
Yeah, a lot of good reminiscing. So that's kind of how the whole thing came about.
I was looking through some old American Heartbreak interviews, and in one point in there, you say, I'd love to do a show with Buckcherry.
Yeah, I've always been a fan of the band. They're a great band.
Everything kind of comes full circle eventually.
I know, right? Yeah. It's so full circle that the guy who signed Buckcherry to DreamWorks when, you know, with their big breakthrough with the first album is the same guy who signed Jetboy to MCA Records. So.
Nuts, man. Nuts. Once you start like dissecting everything, everything's connected.
Totally. Yeah, for sure.
So just to trace a few early parts of your journey, are your family all originally from San Francisco? Had they been there for some time?
Yeah. I guess I would be third generation. So it'd be my great grandparents on both sides of my, with my mom and dad.
What did your mom and dad do when you were growing up?
They were actually, my mom had a retail store. They were really small business people, you know. My dad had an importing exporting company.
Was you right in the heart of the city?
Right in the heart. I know when the people say San Francisco, a lot of people think, you know, you could go on the outskirts, San Jose and Oakland, all that. I was in San Francisco proper, right in the area code was San Francisco. So
a hive of activity then. I've only been there one time.
Yeah, it's great. I grew up right near the Bay Bridge. You know, I used to go to sleep as a kid hearing the ocean crashing against the rocks and then, you know, the foghorns because it's so foggy there and cold. And
tell me about the cold. I was not prepared for that. I'd been to Hollywood a couple of times and then me and my wife went to San Francisco right in the middle of July. It's like, oh, you never have to take anything with long sleeves or anything. The first afternoon we got there, I was like, holy shit.
Yeah, it gets cold. It's way southern and northern California is way different. You go north of San Francisco and a little bit south, it gets warmer, but San Francisco, it's on the bay, so you get the cold.
Yeah, that caught us off guard for sure. So when you think of the 70s, perhaps before music became a big thing for you, what do you remember? Was there any big trends or anything like that?
Well, the 70s, that was the core of my childhood, really, my early teens, you know, so I'm a total product of music-wise Kiss and Aerosmith and Cheap Trick and Sex Pistols and Ramones of the, you know, the 70s era, that stuff, and TV shows like the Banana Splits and, you know, Lidsville and all that stuff, and the American Bandstand, Soul Train, all that kind of shit.
Was sports any kind of big thing for you?
I didn't get really into sports. The sports that I got into, which it definitely was, of course, the 70s was skateboarding. Probably wasn't even considered a sport then, but I was super into the whole Dogtown Z-Boy era and Tony Alva and Jay Adams. And later on, it was, you know, San Francisco became a very big street skating thing. You know, I grew up with like Tommy Guerrero, who was one of the Bones Brigade guys. And, you know, we were all kids just into skateboarding.
That's awesome. Is that something you've kind of carried on?
Yeah, a little bit. Not. I did for a little while, like a few years back, but time-wise, I don't really have much time. Got really into skiing as a kid too, downhill skiing. If anything, I'd like to get back into that, you know.
Yeah. Did you see any of the skateboarding at the Olympics?
I watched little snippets of it. What they do now is just unreal.
It's nuts. Those stuff from like the 70s and early 80s, like skateboarding and BMX. It's like took 30, 40 years for it to come back again. Now it's at the friggin' Olympics. It's crazy.
I know. It's cool. About time, you know. I mean, the BMX, I was into that too. The whole Webcos and red lines and, you know.
Superb. So you're an AM radio kid before rock music came along, right?
Yeah, I would be, I guess, yeah, that generation for me is growing up. I had my AM radio waking up to, you know, Cliff Richard, Devil Woman and Glenn Campbell, Rhinestone Cowboy and Southern Nights. I love all the AM radio. I find that now that's mostly what I listen to. I never knew a lot of the bands. I just knew the songs from the radio in the car with my parents and stuff. And now I just find it just how great those songs were.
Oh man, just pure melody and all that kind of stuff, isn't it?
Exactly. Pure melody and just well-crafted songs.
Did that fuel some of your early record buys, singles or 45s or anything?
Yeah. In the early days, I had a lot of this, 7 inches, and then getting into the LPs, the albums and all that. Buying an album was huge back then.
Yeah. If I've got it right, was it your friend Alex who introduced you to Kiss?
Yep. My good friend Alex Margolin, and he introduced me to Kiss in 1975, and he was the first of my friends to pick up a guitar, and we used to go to all the shows together, and he was a year or two older than me. I can't remember exactly now, but anyways, we're still great friends, and he's like follows all the stuff I've been doing. He's a Buckcherry fan as well. And
do you remember how he sold them to you? Was it, you've got to hear this band? Had he heard about them for a while?
Yeah, he was just ahead of the curve, just being a little bit older, and he had Kiss Alive, and I remember it well, being in his room on 27th Avenue in SF, and it was right before Christmas of 75, and he put on Kiss Alive. You got to hear this band, and I was just instantly hooked.
Totally different to anything you'd heard before. Was that kind of like the first heavy rock stuff, do you think you'd heard?
Yeah, probably the first heavy rock thing. And, of course, the imagery of the record and all that was like added to everything as a kid. You saw these dudes dressed up the way they were with the face paint and all that. And you're just like, holy shit, whatever it is, I like this.
And it's probably the way that Alex perhaps sold them to you as well. I think when you hear stuff from your friends talking so passionately about something as well, you want part of it as well.
Yeah.
I got to get a piece of this.
Yeah. Exactly. It was always that growing up as a kid, in that neighborhood, somebody always had either an older sister or brother. So they were one step ahead of things, So my friend's older brother, I remember seeing Let There Be Rock on it in front of his stack of records. And my other buddy, Gus, his sister Jenny, had the first Tom Petty record. And you just saw those records and were just like into it. You were just like, shit, that's cool. I want that.
It's weird, isn't it? You just sold on it straight away. There's something so larger than life about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that was all you wanted for that Christmas, right? The Kiss album.
Yeah, and that's what I got.
Did you start picking up the previous albums from that point?
Yeah, but from that point on, it was all over. It was forget about it. It was all about Kiss. I mean, I think, of course, Destroyer came out next. It wasn't even out yet, but I bought that when it came out. And then you discover the originals, and then here comes Rock and Roll Over, and then Love Gun, and Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park, watching that with my buddy Gus, and all that stuff.
Was that a big deal on the TV?
Yeah, it was a huge deal, yeah. And then going to see them, I saw Kiss August 17th, 1977 with Cheap Trick. And ironically, it was the day Elvis Presley died.
Wow.
Kind of like this big iconic moment in my life where it's like, oh my God, the king of rock and roll passes, but the torch was handed.
Yeah, that's nuts. But Kiss wasn't your first gig though, right? That would be a Day on the Green event?
Yeah, Day on the Green, yeah, exactly. Yep, the Eagles.
That's a pretty high bar to start with.
Yeah, that was my first show. I was very into Steve Miller, the Fly Like an Eagle record at that same point, because that would have been 77. So that's another one I discovered. Again, AM radio, playing that song, Fly Like an Eagle. I got into that, bought that record, and of course, Hotel California. And so that was Day on the Green, when that was the big thing in the Bay Area.
What are those events like for people, especially people from the UK? How big are those events?
Yeah, they're baseball, football stadiums. So they're roughly hold, I guess they hold about 50, 60,000 or something. Back in those days, there was no capacity thing, really. You just shoehorn people in. No small barriers, everything was a free for all. So
nuts. Who'd you go to that gig with?
Actually, that was the one, the first two shows with that one and Kiss. My dad took me with two or three of the same friends, both those shows.
Dad taking you to the gig, legend. Like, I'm going to suffer these bands because my kid wants to go see it.
Exactly. I mean, it's just wow. I mean, the first band with Day on the Green, the first band I ever saw play live would be the opening act, which was Foreigner.
That's crazy when you can look back, when you see how those bands have exploded all the years later.
Yeah. And they became like this massive band, of course. They were nothing. They were just a new band with Cold as Ice breaking on the radio. Yeah.
Those events have played a few pivotal roles in your musical journey, the Day on the Green thing, because didn't you see Van Halen with Aerosmith?
That was my third show, which was Van Halen. Van Halen opened. Yeah, they were first. That was 1978, so it would have been like July or something of 78. And AC/DC followed them. And again, both those bands, you discover it and become a fan.
Had you heard anything about Van Halen prior to that moment?
I don't think so. My neighbor used to play the first Van Halen all the time. So it was probably around that same time. And then after you see them live, you see them, and even though they're like this small, because you're this small and you're so far back as a kid, but that was, I got into that first record. It was, everybody did.
Was Jetboy invited to open a Day on the Green event later on when things were taking off for you guys? What's the story behind that?
It was 1987, and, we had signed to Elektra, working on the first Jetboy. I don't even know if we had finished the album or whatever, but we had a pretty well-known booking agent. He booked a lot of these bands in the 70s that I love, from, Cheap Trick to UFO and all that. So I remember Day on the Green just telling our manager, it's like, what's the chance of getting on a Day on the Green? And the one coming up was Motley Crue, Whitesnake, and Poison. And I think it was MSG. Schenker was opening. And just oddly enough, he dropped off and they put us on it. I'm sure it was definitely who you know and political inside, some shuffling of the shells there. And we got it. That was huge. But unfortunately, we were in a car wreck on the way up.
That's insane.
It's in Oakland, so we were in LA at that point. The drive is like 6 hours, so we would do it all the time to go home and visit family and stuff. So yeah, we're just driving, and a guy fell asleep at the wheel, and he hit the north side of the freeway while he was going south, and just slammed us off the road, and a big old truck hit him, and it was a total mess, and I broke my right arm. I was driving the car. Mickey was sleeping in the back, and Sammy was in the passenger seat. And they were kind of snoozing, so they were just like completely shook up. Mick was kind of cut up with glass, with the windows shattered in. And
unreal, man.
Yeah, it was brutal,
Jetboy still played, though, but obviously you couldn't.
Still played. I mean, the show must go on, as Freddie sung, right?
Oh, man, that's crazy. That's crazy. So, Kiss have been a long-time favourite band for you. You did eventually get to see them live, and you still talk passionately about them to this day. Have you crossed paths with any of them over the years? Because doesn't Bruce play one of your guitars?
Yeah, Bruce does. I got introduced to Bruce a few years back through one of my dealers, Rebel Guitars, and, we've become friends, just his history is quite a remarkable story as well, and his brother and everything, of course, connected from the old days. And so, at one point during the second album, we did have the same manager as Kiss, which is Larry Mazer, who ironically enough manages Buckcherry now. So, again, the circle's small in the industry.
Have you crossed paths with Gene and Paul at any point?
In the old days, we would see guys around. I remember like at a restaurant or something like that. But for my big one, before I moved the shop to LA just 3 years ago, Bruce turned on Paul's guitar tech to my stuff because Paul was looking to get some refinish work on this old 59 that he had, and it just didn't. I guess it had been refinished a couple times, blah blah blah, and he, Bruce suggested me. So the first person to come to the shop when I got the shop in LA was Paul Stanley.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So I refinished his guitar and kind of, became friends with him, and his tech and I are good friends now. And he came to the shop 7 times, and yes, I counted. Even brought his son one time. Evan even came by, so it was cool.
That's awesome, man.
You're fanboying out on the inside, but at the same time, I'm a fan of a lot of stuff he loves. He's a big Zeppelin head. I love Zeppelin. And so there was a good connection of just music that we just sat and talked about, and guitars, it was great.
I love that, man. I love that. So Kiss explode for you. I guess it was just music from that point. Posters on the walls, logos on the school books, all that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It was that and Cheap Trick, I got obsessed with Cheap Trick and Aerosmith, hearing Walk This Way on the AM radio, buying Toys in the Attic when that came out. And that was the days you got turned on to music, and all your friends, the record store, you would grab your skateboard and head up to the record store and, go buy a record and then go hang out at whose ever house and put it on, and everybody's get something different. And, you share the records and good stuff.
Your love of music goes deep, though, with a lot of bands. I think, did you used to buy like a lot of import records as well and read Kerrang and all that kind of thing?
Yeah. Another friend of mine, we went to high school together. Didn't go to grade school, but I met him through a friend of mine, neighborhood friend. It was, Alex and my friend Gus and my friend Eric, Lannon, who was in American Heartbreak, drummer. Him and I to this day, we could sit down and talk about records and useless information and who produced what and wrote what and when it came out, all that stuff. But we discovered the import section at Tower Records and then a used record store, and we discovered Kerrang. I think the first issue was the Blackmore cover, which was probably the second issue. That became the new Bible for us. So this whole new wave of British heavy metal.
Just reading the tiniest little column, getting a spark of interest for a band.
And it's ironically, it's funny because the Bay Area is known for like a metal capital because of what's come out of it. And a lot of it has to do with just, I don't know why the metal just, that new wave of British metal just hit the high school kids in San Francisco and the Bay Area like really hard. I mean, people got into it and it was like this community, and it wasn't just Saxon and Motorhead. It was, deep as, whatever, Diamond Head and Angel Witch and Praying Mantis, like deep stuff.
At what point did you decide you wanted to learn an instrument and possibly look at playing in a band? Because wasn't your first guitar a hand-me-down guitar?
Yeah, it was a hand-me-down Memphis Junior from my friend Alex. It really was Kiss. It goes back to Kiss. It's really, the Alive where he's got the tobacco Les Paul. I just picked up on, smoking guitar. What kid didn't dig that?
You weren't trying to light guitars on fire before you could play power chords, was you?
I made a couple cutouts before I had one and put some smoke bombs in it. I was pretty into it.
Did you take to it pretty quickly?
Yeah, I guess I did. I in those days, your parents would throw you into like some sort of a classical nylon string guitar you'd get, and you're like, you're just like, what's this? But eventually, you get an electric and you start plucking around and just doing your thing. As much as I was into like lots of genres of music, my hands took to a certain style, which was very Malcolm Young and, rhythm orientated type, just rock and punk type stuff. So
have you always liked that position, that kind of dynamic within a band, just holding down the rhythm, just chugging away?
Yeah, I have. I mean, I love all the other stuff too, but it was like there was so much of that, and I just kind of discovered early on, I'm like, well, I'm pretty comfortable with this, and I'm like kind of, feel like this is kind of more my thing. I love all the flashy stuff and the fast stuff, but you kind of just know your boundaries of what you are as a player. Not everybody's going to be like Eddie Van Halen, Randy Rhoads, or you got a lot of great guys out there, but to me, nobody's touched them yet.
People like Malcolm Young, people who like love AC/DC know how important he is within that framework and all that kind of thing, like the unsung hero of the band in a way.
Oh yeah, exactly. It's like Malcolm and Phil Rudd. It's like I've seen very few AC/DC tribute bands that really they'll capture the Angus thing and all that over the top, but the overall energy and that feel and that solidness, it's difficult.
Was you able to see much of the scene that was developing in San Francisco? As in, when did you first get a taste of that as opposed to like larger gigs? Because there were some really famous clubs in San Francisco, which often get overlooked by what grew from a bit further south in Hollywood, I guess.
Well, I mean, I went to all the big shows as a kid. Of course, that was what you knew. And then I think it was my buddy Eric and I from American Heartbreak. I think we went to our first club show. We must have been in the 8th grade or something like that. And it was Rick Derringer. It was at this place, the old Waldorf, which was a Bill Graham's club that he used to rent out the venue and do the smaller shows there.
Did things suddenly feel dangerous?
Yeah, it was just, we were young. So it was like, you had to buy 2 drink minimum. So we're like 14, 15, buying Cokes or whatever, even though other things were going on outside of that when you could, but that was the first club stuff. And I think then we started going, they had a thing called Metal Mondays at this very club, the old Waldorf. And I think the first one, which I went to, was Motley Crue. And that was kind of like the thing. We started to go to these Metal Mondays every week.
What year would that have been?
God, that would have been 81.
Wow. So right at the beginning of Motley Crue.
Yeah, they were not, it was Leather Records. I mean, they were like just trekking back and forth, LA to SF. So it was right when that came out. The Leather Records one.
That must have been chaos, that gig. Was there already a buzz about it?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, I went to see them. I saw in Kerrang. I saw a picture of that Too Fast for Love, and it was the Leather Records, and it was like an article. Some of that Kerrang stuff, kind of like made fun of stuff at the same time of bands like that. And then sure enough, there was the album sitting there in the rack, and it was in a loose, shrunk wrap, just independent records thing, and it was the Leather Records one, and I got super into it.
That's crazy that you learned about that from a magazine from the UK, from a band which was just a few hours down south.
Exactly. That's where I first saw them. It was in Kerrang, and then there was Bam Magazine, and then I saw ads, them coming up to do these shows and all that. And we were all into the metal at the time, but we went to see that because before that, I guess it was before that, I had seen at that club, I had seen Motorhead, Ace of Spades tour, saw Girl School, that must have been right after Hit and Run came out. these bands started coming to America, but we were super into those bands. That was like for high school, early 8th grade, 9th grade. That was like the big discovery of a shift from, the Kiss and Aerosmith and all that was the new wave of British heavy metal stuff.
And that's going to have like the same appeal as it was for us when American bands came to the UK. It was just such a huge deal.
Yeah, exactly. I remember all that, just seeing Motorhead and just being into that Ace of Spades. So that must have been 81, right? 81, 82.
How loud was that gig?
Yeah, that was great. Again, it's like both those shows, I took a camera and took pictures. There was a few of us that always just snap shots. And one of them is Harold O. and Brian Liu, who did that Murder in the Front Row book. I mean, those two guys were there. And those are some of the history of those books and stuff. And what they did is they took just snapshots with an old Kodak as a kid.
Great, man. And I would imagine as you were getting more and more into the scene during the early to mid 80s, it must have been like pretty much a free-for-all of styles and sounds within the general rock scene before it became a little bit more refined, I guess, a few years on. Was it just a clash of everything?
Yeah, I mean, once we started going to the clubs, it was Eric and I would go to all the shows, and after that we'd go to the Stone and we saw Saxon and Denim and Leather Era or something like that. Then you start seeing local bands because local bands would open, and then you would see these local bands and you'd start just reading the strip ads every week on who's playing, and you just go, even if you didn't know who they were, it just became this community, this scene.
Yeah, and it was in 83 you'd meet Fernie, who was working with like a local band Head On, right? Kind of San Francisco legends.
They were legends. They were a band. It was at that old Waldorf too. And I don't know what show it was, but whatever it was, it's like I met him there. We just exchanged phone numbers at that point on a scrap piece of napkin or paper or whatever. And we were like fast friends and just inseparable for many years from that point on. But little did we know that moment we met what we would do.
I've thought that sometimes about people I've been in bands with who you meet them that one night and you're effectively getting married to them that night for at least 10 years or whatever.
I know, yeah. From that day on, it was like we hung out. It was another friend of ours, Brian Crow, and he was in this band Strange Toys. But him and I were doing a band together. And then Fern and I started writing songs and we just had this vision of like wanting to start a band. And it was this, we were both had that determination drive. It was at that point of our lives was super parallel.
Ready to take on the world. Was you like 17?
I was like 17. I was still in high school.
How did your family feel about that when they could see you totally getting into this and really wanted to make a go of it?
They were supportive, parents then were really, our generation, me growing up, that they call us like the latchkey kids. Parents would go to work and leave the kids at home, and it was safe to leave the doors unlocked and come and go as you please to your friend's house around the corner or whatever and hang out in the neighborhoods. It was like everything was pretty chill. They were supportive. They were both from small businesses, and they never really pushed anything down my throat to be this way or that way.
Jetboy would start traveling to Hollywood to do shows. What was your first reaction of it down there compared to the scene you was in your hometown? Was it totally different?
It was different because, you grew up watching TV shows that was all in LA, or, go back to Kiss, the fan club, the Kiss Army fan club was in Los Angeles, so to you, everything was like this big deal in Los Angeles, from TV shows you'd see to movies. And so you go down there and it was a little bit more of a excitement, also you're younger, you're out of your element, your safe zone at home. So it's exciting. Yeah, all that. And then, the billboards were over the top there for movies, and it still is to this day. It's Hollywood.
The Jetboy story is a real journey of ups and downs, and certainly a great example of the pitfalls of the record industry. But even after that band, you continued to push forward you had the band Mind Zone and would eventually form American Heartbreak in 96, I believe. I didn't realize how long a run American Heartbreak was. Was it for like nearly 10 years?
It was about 10 years. Yep, just about.
It had I guess, the blueprint of bands like the Wild Hearts and Helicopters. Could I throw Degeneration in there too?
Absolutely, yeah, for sure.
Kind of like the perfect style for someone from the hard rock scene, but still wanting to do something exciting with an edge in that time,
right? When
it was like the late 90s. How was that for you forming that band? Was it exciting again after everything that happened with Jetboy?
Like thinking about it, it was the same type of evolution of like with Jetboy. And then after, even when going back to when Fern and I started hanging out, we go to the record stores. There was a record store called the Record Vault, and the really turning point for Jetboy, which ignited so many bands in the 80s of that moment, Guns N' Roses, all of us, was Hanoi Rocks. discovering those records going like, again, in the import section, band from this small little place across the world, Finland. And here is a band that is going to jumpstart a whole scene in Los Angeles that became just worldly known. I would give them, if anybody can give a big prize to them for doing it, whether what came out of what they influenced was good or bad, that's a pretty big deal. And it was the same with American Heartbreak. We were doing Mind Zone, and Michael Butler, the bass player, him and I, when we were doing Mind Zone, we were always into Eric who was in American Heartbreak, turned us on to the Wild Hearts, and that really sparked like, who's this? And then Degeneration, and you had bands like New York Loose. There was this underground movement, again, across the world, some in our backyard, like Degen and New York Loose in New York. And it was just like, wow, this is kind of more what I like. So Butler and I just said, let's just start a rock band, Again, it morphed into, I knew this guy, I knew Eric, brought in Eric, and then our first guitar player, Curtis, we knew him. Butler knew Lance. And then we just all started writing together, and boom, that was it. We roll into a 10-year career.
American Heartbreak were a band I remember vividly from MySpace in the early 2000s, seeing the logo as a constant. But isn't there a link to Michael, your bass player's old band, the Flexor Pleasers, and Tom from MySpace?
Yeah, exactly. He was the singer of his band Flexor Pleasers.
That's crazy.
His famous story is they fired him on stage, which is classic. So yeah, that Tom guy, I think he was going to whatever school in Berkeley, for computer, whatever you call it stuff. And, back in the early days of these sites, that was nothing. You have Friendster, and then he started this MySpace.
That guy just cashed his check after about 10 years, and now he's just living the life.
Right? Interesting.
Didn't you bring American Heartbreak to Europe?
Yeah, we did Europe. I could say like 6 times maybe.
How did that come about?
Manny Montana, who has started Teenage Head and is still doing it, he does really well with it now. He was probably a year or two in, just starting this, bringing bands from America, really, and doing more like, like a punk rock tour in a sense, like just supplying the back line and all that. And I guess I don't know if he reached out to me or somebody said, you should see what about this guy. And we started talking, and he says, yeah, I'll bring you over here for, 4-6 weeks or whatever. And everybody was like, hell yeah, let's do it. So it was really, you flip the dime and you pay your way, and then hope that with what you're getting over there, we'll put the money back into everybody's pocket, and you go have a rock and roll vacation.
Did you ever make the UK?
No, never made the UK though.
What was it? All like Spain, Italy, all that kind of
Spain, Italy, France, a lot of Germany. We went up to Croatia. Yeah, all those areas. Again, it was during that early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s. There was a whole movement over there, People Like You Records, and they were putting out a lot of stuff over there that was punk driven and kind of rockabilly, psychobilly, whatever you call it, type stuff.
It was all a bit of a mishmash around that time. It was very exciting. It never had like a real focus, but very exciting time. You felt like something was bubbling under.
Right. That was fun. We had a lot of good times, especially after, Butler and I both had come from a major record, label era of like touring with money and a budget and a bus and all that, to just getting back in the van, doing it the old school way. And it was awesome. We had fun.
And all this time, had you been tinkering with guitars and building guitars, and that had been picking up steam?
Yeah, pretty much. Early on, the early American Heartbreak, when that first started, I was actually guitar teching for Chris Isaak. I did that for like 3 years. So it allowed me to kind of, not have to be at a day job all the time. And, eBay comes along, and I started doing a lot of rock and roll collectible stuff, buying, trading, selling, and all that. And I saw this whole guitar thing pop up. It really was relicking, the relic guitar. They weren't even companies, just people doing it, had websites, and just real underground. And I just was super into it. That's kind of stuff I love,
Was that a whole new learning curve with the whole relic process?
Yeah, I guess it was totally new. It was brand new then. This is like 15, 20 years at this point, seeing this stuff, But I built the guitar in high school, so I was super into it. And, I always tinkered with my guitars. And so I started building a few for fun, and I tried selling some on eBay, and some sold. And just one thing led to another, and it just
grew organically.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I got a good crew now of guys that are awesome, but there's a lot of stuff that I still just got to do.
How was that for you, for it growing from you, like your one-man band, and like, shit, I'm going to need extra people? Was that intimidating?
At first I'm so detailed and sometimes too micromanaging, but I've let go a lot of that. you let go and just like, these guys are all good and they have great ideas too. So you just gotta like, just trust that everything's gonna, be as it should. And it's working good. It can't always, you can't grow if you gotta be doing everything, It's that time I'm ready just to let these guys do the intense stuff and really get some spotlight on them. And, I'll do what I do. I'd like to do the aging stuff mainly. So,
Billy, thanks for chatting with me, mate. I'll let you go because I know you're juggling between the guitar stuff and the Buckcherry stuff. So thanks ever so much for chatting with me, mate. It's been great to see you and hopefully see you when you get back in the UK.
Yeah, I'll let you know when we're out there for sure. We'll stay in touch and good luck with the show, this stuff, man.
Like I said, one of the coolest guys I've met, and so great to see things continuing to work out great for him after all these years in the business, both with Rock and Roll Relics and a crazy busy touring schedule with Buckcherry. So I really appreciate Billy sharing some of his valuable time to talk on this show. Buckcherry are out on the road for the rest of the year, and all tour dates can be found at buckcherry.com. And please check out all the great work Billy does with his company Rock and Roll Relics over at rockandrollrelics.net. We have over 100 episodes of this show streaming at stvpod.com, along with some straight-to-video music videos and merch. And please, if you can, take a minute to share the podcast with some friends you think will enjoy the show too. Alright, that's all for this episode. Lots going off over on the Straight to Video Patreon if you want to get that little bit extra at patreon.com/stvpod. But till we chat again, please take care, and I'll be back with another episode real soon.